Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment we're going to begin the funeral services of Mrs. Louise S. Strum. We invite everyone to please take a moment to find a seat. We also ask everyone to take a moment to please be sure your cell phones have been turned off. Officiating this morning will be Rabbi Andrea London. And that's the part where I'm saying, please turn your phones off. At this time, the rabbi is going to approach the family to perform the ancient ceremony of Kriya. If it's comfortable for you, to the family in the first row, to please rise.
Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid, ki mimini balamot, lechen samach libi ve'egel kivodi, apis arishkon levetach. I have set the eternal always before me. God is at my side, I shall not be moved. Therefore does my heart exult, and my soul rejoice. My being is secure, for you will not abandon me to death, nor let your faithful ones see destruction. You show me the path of life. Your presence brings fullness of joy, enduring happiness is your gift. Death has taken our beloved Louise. Our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence there is lamentation. In their tears there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, be with them. For Louise's love that united us in life and which death cannot sever, for her companionship that we shared along life's path and which continues through the tenderness of memory, for the gifts of her heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness and is now a precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give our thanks to God. In this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures that brings us the ever-new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator, in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. Adonai roi lo echsar binoteshe yarbitzeni, al mei minachot yinahaleni, nafshi shovev yancheni v'maglei tzedek lema'an shemo. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Adonai ma'on ata ita lanu bedor vador, b'terem harim yuladu, v'techolel eretz v'tevel, u'me'olam ad olam ata el. O God, you have been our refuge in every generation. Before the mountains came into being, before you brought forth the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity, you are God. You return us to dust. You decree, return, you mortals, for in your sight 1,000 years are as yesterday, when it has passed as a watch in the night. You engulf us in sleep. We are like grass that renews itself. At daybreak, it flourishes anew. At dusk, it withers and dries up. The span of our life is 80 years and 10, or given strength, 80 years. But the best of those years have trouble and sorrow. They pass by speedily, and we are in darkness. Teach us, therefore, so to number our days, that we may attain a heart of wisdom. Turn to us, O God, show mercy to your servants. Satisfy us at daybreak with your steadfast love, that we may sing for joy all our days. Let your deeds be seen by your servants, your glory by their children. May your favor, O God, be upon us. Establish the work of our hands, that it may long endure. As we gather today to mourn the loss of Louise Strum, we also come to reflect on the almost 92 years of her life, to think about her legacy, the love that she shared with us in her life. And so each of her 4 children would like to share some memories of Louise today. I'd like to invite Greg to join us first on the bima and share his thoughts.
Morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I've thought a lot about what I was going to say when this morning came. What? Okay. Is that better? Okay. When we were here a few weeks ago, when it looked like Mom was going to pass away then, and then she rallied, what it accomplished was she had all of her children together in the same place at the same time, and her granddaughter. And that meant more to her, I think, than anything. I remember walking into the room and I could just see it on her face. And when I think about Mom, what I think of first and foremost is how much she loved her kids. And that's what she really lived for, I think. And I know she spoke many times about her life and how things had gone. I don't think that she was quite prepared for the way things worked out in some respects. But always, first and foremost, was she loved her kids. And that was her primary, I think it was her primary focus in life. And when we were all together back in late August, early September, I then had a number of conversations with the people from hospice that would see her on a regular basis and the staff at Miller. And these last few weeks were for her, were some of the best that she'd had in a long time. They were good weeks. And I think it was because we were all there together. And at the end, that's really all that matters. It's really all that matters. I don't have any funny stories to tell or anything like that. Mom and I didn't have that kind of a relationship. That's okay. But I will always remember that she was my mother, and I loved her because love is just is. And so as I move forward now, that's what I'm going to remember.
Now I'd like to invite her son Scott to speak.
Louise, being born in 1930, started off as a depression baby, and then she became a war baby. And from what I've seen and heard about her early life, she was seen as this brilliant child. She was the favorite of the family. A famous example is they had moved to Elyria, Ohio, when Dr. Leonard, her father, had a practice there, and she had occasion to take the train to Chicago. And the entire family met her at the station, like the Queen of England was coming to visit, okay? That's how she was regarded. But she took that in stride because I don't think she was a typical prima donna girl or whatever. I made a discovery on the occasion of when we had to close her townhouse apartment to put her in her first assisted living care in Quincy, Illinois. I found a letter that she'd written to her parents. It was tucked in a photo album. This was a long 4-page letter, single-spaced, both sides of each letter, and I read it, and it was apparent that this was a continuously, thinking to paper, well, in this case, typewritten, at a typewriter. Who can write a letter like that without having a rough draft, or maybe 2 rough drafts? But evidently, she wrote it out and sent it. And I was stunned because I thought, this is a brain. And the way that she ran the family, and when I wanted to recount her overall effort as a mother, I can't remember an instant, any time, where there was a lull in her motherhood, stewardship of the family. It was continuous. And there were ups and downs. There were, you might say that she had her emotional limitations when confronted with very stark times and maybe financial situations that she found unacceptable. Well, she'd throw a fit because she wanted a standard for the family, and that happened, okay? And so I say, well done, Louise, as a mother, as a person, as a leader of our family. And she might have a few choice words. Dad used to come to me and say, "Your mother speaks like a longshoreman sometimes, Scott." And I said, well, Dad, sometimes, Or I might turn to her and go, "Well, Mom, that was a good one." She goes, "Oh, shut up," and laugh it off. But I was maybe that was my role to help things along in that way. But I remember growing up, just a witness, Debbie Danoff in Decatur. Do you remember how things were in Decatur in the 50s, 60s? Those were vibrant times, and Louise was part of that, and they're typical of her vibrancy. Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Louise's daughter, Beth, to speak.
Okay. So, I'm going to read you 2 things. I decided not to sing today because never know where that's going to go. But I'm going to read you some of the lyrics of a song that really touched my heart. But first, I'm going to read you a quote from Maya Angelou. "When a great soul dies, after a period, peace blooms slowly and always irregularly. Spaces fill with a kind of soothing electricity. Our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us. They existed. They existed. She existed. We can be and be better for they existed. Maya Angelou. So the lyrics, the poem, Becky and I call this songwriter a poem, like people always call Paul Simon a poet who happens to play music. So this song really touched me. My belief is that it doesn't matter if your loved one is 120 or 40 or 60 or 80. When you lose them, the feeling of loss and grief is so huge that the age doesn't matter. It's the loss that matters. So here we go. I don't mind the stretches, I don't mind the detours, the long way around. Surprise on the winding side streets, holes in the roads, and bridges fall down. I'll end up where I need to be. I now must confess, you were part of that map, routes that were safely assumed. It isn't all right to walk off with your light. I don't mind you leaving too soon. I do mind you leaving too soon. I do mind you leaving too soon. I don't mind some mystery, a few grains of doubt. We ride with the ebb and the flow. We wrestle with questions, they never run out. I don't mind the answers don't show. But I'm certain, quite sure, of the one precious place reserved in the world just for you, Mom. Sometimes I could swear that you're standing right there. I do mind you leaving too soon. I do mind you leaving too soon. And the last thing that I'd like to say is I have innumerable memories of, as a young child, standing on a step stool in the kitchen, baking with her. Anybody who knows Louise knew that she was an exceptionally good baker. Her specialties were chocolate cake and cheesecake and coffee cake. And those recipes have been handed down to myself and to Megan, and we're sharing those now together. And she didn't do it because she had to. She did it because she loved to, and she loved to do it with her kids. And I think that was a beautiful way of sharing something that she loved with her kids, like sitting down at the piano and playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Didn't matter how old I was. She always played it. If I was 18, she sat down and played it. Remnants of her childhood playing piano. And she passed that on to Greg and Scott. And the love of music came to all of us very strongly. And I know that we'll always be grateful for that because music is a huge part of our lives. So thank you for that, Mom.
And now I'd like to invite Lenny to speak.
Hello. My mother, as my siblings have touched on, had a great love of family. She and my dad were married for nearly 70 years. and they love their children very much. So I have many memories of my mother. An early memory is being around 5 years old, sitting on their bed with my siblings and just talking. I felt a great feeling of warmth. Another early memory is when my aunt, her sister, came in from New York with her family. It was summertime or spring, and everyone was out gardening, another love of my mother's: music, gardening, literature. And I remember, for the first and not the last time, putting on a Beatles album, showing my cousins, hey, this is my brother's Beatles album. Also around this time period, I don't remember this, but I do remember the recollection and the look of terror on my mother's face as she retold it when I got lost in a department store when I was about 5 or so years old. As I got older, I recognized that look and how scared she must have been. When my father was ill when I was in high school, I do remember distinctly our conversations, my mother and I, as she picked me up after school so I could go see him. It was a scary week. He turned out to be fine, but there were several days where we weren't sure. And the conversations that took place as we drove back and forth between the hospital, I remember very well. I remember being at the University of Iowa and my parents coming to see me and how much I look forward to it, especially my first year. I remember how vigilant my mother was that I finish my education and that I do what I wanted to do in my life. There was always a strong family connection. We would get together for holidays like Hanukkah and Passover, birthdays. My mother loved making a grand meal for all of us. But one of the things I remember the most is her sense of humor. I remember being about 15 years old, and she had friends over, the Gogeks, I believe, and others. And I was sitting in the family room, and she came in after dinner was over. She was preparing some sort of dessert. And I remember catching it out of the corner of my eye. She was just pouring liquor in this big pot. And I was like, Mom, what are you doing? She turns around laughing, going, and she made some funny gesture and noise. And I just smiled because I knew it was so her. For many years, when I was in college up until the point when they left for Quincy, because my father's health had been deteriorating a bit. She had offered me a menorah for many years, to which I'd always said up until that point, that's okay, Mom. I'm here for several, 2, maybe 3 days of Hanukkah, and that's plenty for me to light the candles and say the prayer. But for the first time, I realized that wouldn't be the case for the first time. So I said yes to her question finally, to a menorah. And I took a box of things home that day. My siblings and I had been going over to her apartment to help and to take a few things that she didn't want anymore. And when I unpacked the box, I discovered the menorah, there wasn't something quite right about it. For those of you who know, a menorah has 9 candle holders, 1 center one, and 8 others for the different nights of the holiday. But 1 was missing. So I thought maybe I had done something in transport. Eventually I got around to calling her and explaining what had happened, thinking maybe I had done something. And there was a pause and a laugh. And she's like, oh, that's been broken for years. And I'm like, really, Mom? Nearly 20 years of asking if I want a menorah and then you give me the broken one? Another funny thing that happened to happen while they were living in Quincy and I visited. The custom was for Mom to pick me up occasionally with Dad or not, and then the next morning, if he stayed at the VA that night, we would go get him. And I would always drive when I was there she was elderly, and I felt more comfortable giving her a break from that duty. And we get to this four-way stop sign just not far from her apartment. And I stop and I wait for a moment, and being a Chicago driver and the others were just sitting there, I went. And she's like, "Whoa, Len, what are you doing? You need to be more patient." I'm like, "I waited, I noticed." And she was like, "Well, that's easy for you to say. You're not sitting in the death seat." And I'm like, "What?" And of course I knew what she was referencing, but I'd never heard that term before. And I'm like, "Where did that come from?" She's like, "You know what I'm talking about." I would love having conversations with her on the phone. As the years went by, especially when they moved to Quincy, there would be the weekly or every other week conversation, and I really enjoyed making her laugh. As she leaves us, I remember this picture that I took when we moved her into Miller, which is skilled nursing, a couple years ago. And it's a picture of me when I was about 15. My hair was long and looked oily. I was wearing some old flannel shirt, and I was looking away from her. She was sitting next to me, and she was looking at me and like almost touching my head or my hair. And what I realized after so many years, it was a great sign of affection, how she cared about me. So I will miss you, and I love you.
Louise was born almost 92 years ago in Chicago to Leonard and Cecile Harris. Her father, as we heard, was a physician, and when he was drafted into the Army, they moved around the country a bit. Louise had one sister, Barbara. She attended high school at Senn and then moved to Peoria with her family, where she finished high school. Then she went on to the University of Colorado at Boulder. But she didn't finish. She did not graduate because during her second year in college, she came home for the holidays and met Jerry at a holiday party. They fell for each other instantly, and they were married 4 months later in April 1950. They were married almost 70 years, and she was so devoted to him. After they were married, they moved to Decatur, where Jerry worked in his family's scrap metal business, and there they had their first 3 children in 3.5 years, Greg, Scott, and Beth. As Beth and Lenny commented to me the other day, they have no idea how she possibly could have handled 3 children who were so young. And then Lenny came 9 years later. In 1968, they moved to Northbrook. As her children got older, she began working at the Merchandise Mart, where she managed several showrooms and was an interior designer, and she worked there for 20 years. Louise liked to play cards, listen to music, garden, go to the opera, the movies, and as Beth mentioned, she was known for her baking. I'm still wondering, Lenny, what she was making with all that alcohol in a pot. She was active in her sisterhood at her synagogue and Hadassah and Ort. And when she and Jerry retired, they enjoyed travel to the Caribbean, London, and Hawaii. Jerry and Louise took the whole family on a cruise for their 50th wedding anniversary. As we remember Louise's life, we think about the legacy that she has left for us. As each of her children spoke about the legacy of family is the most prominent. And she instilled in her children the love of music and encouraged her children to play instruments. Greg, Scott, Beth, and Lenny, her 3 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, this is the legacy that Louise leaves behind. Megan, the one grandchild who lived in the area and who saw her quite a bit, has many fond memories of her grandmother. Holiday meals at the house on Powderhorn, her chopped liver, putting on all her jewelry when at her house, sharing her ice water when in the car, playing Raggedy Ann and Andy, making up full high school drama plots to act with the dolls. Most importantly, though, Louise made sure she told Megan just how much she loved her. And so as we mourn her loss, we think about the love that she had for her family. Zichrona livracha. May her memory be a blessing as we share the stories about her life and as we live by the legacy that she left for us, a legacy of love and of family. Amen. God, you give us loved ones and make them the strength of our life, the light of our eyes. They depart and leave us bereft on a lonely way, but you are the living fountain from which our healing flows. To you the stricken look for comfort and the sorrow-laden for consolation. O God, we see life is through windows that open on eternity. We see that love endures and the soul endures as you, O God, endure forever. We see that the years are more than grass that withers, more than flowers that fade. They weave a timeless pattern in a world that is a dwelling place of your love and glory. We now take a moment to offer a silent prayer in our hearts for Louise and for her family. Please rise as you are able as we continue with El Moed Rachamim, the memorial prayer. El Moed Rachamim shochen bamromim, hamtzei menochane chonat achat kanfei ashchina, im kedushim atorim kazar akia, mazhirim et nishmat, Louise bat Leonard v'Cecile, shalcha le'olama. Bal harachamim yasireha baseter kanafav le'olamim, Vitzura b'torah chayim et nishmata, Adonai hu nachalata, v'tanuach b'shalom al mishkava, v'nomar amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Louise, daughter of Leonard and Cecile, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. Please be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, the interment service will continue at Memorial Park Cemetery at 9900 Grosse Point Road in Skokie. The family will be returning to the Strum residence at Winston Towers, the first floor community room. That's at 7061 North Kedzie Avenue. They'll be together until 9 p.m. following the interment service. Memorial contributions to the family synagogue, Beth Emet, would be appreciated. That information is also on the service folder. For those of you who will be driving in the funeral procession to the cemetery, the procession will be forming in the parking lot, and then we'll be going east on Dempster. The hearse is in front of the synagogue, so the family members will go first, then everyone else will follow. Please obtain an orange safety funeral sticker to place on the right-hand side of your windshield. Have your bright lights and hazard lights on at all times. For additional measures of safety, we will be providing many of the cars with a flag that will be affixed to the top portion of the car. We'll have a car in the back of the funeral procession to hopefully keep other cars from entering the procession. And for your own personal safety, I strongly recommend using a horn liberally as you're going through the intersections. And please do not speak or text on your cellular phone while driving to the cemetery. This time I invite everyone to please rise and stand in place. The pallbearers, please come forward as we escort the casket of Louise Strum from the chapel. Then you may return to your cars.